Our first speaker, Ellen Iskenderian, the President and CEO of Women's World Banking. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Ellen. I think everybody in this audience knows her pretty well. You can see her bio in the link that was just dropped. But Ellen, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this virtual stage.
Thanks so much, Nisha.
Great. So I'm just going to jump right into it. And my first question for you is, Women's World Banking is a pioneer in financial inclusion and gender lens investing. So could you tell us a little bit about Women's World Banking's approach? Why you're doing this?
Right. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm a member of the FinEquity Technical Advisory Committee, which is a great honor, and so really pleased to be a part of the annual meeting, particularly on this topic of gender lens investing. Women's World Banking actually celebrates its 45th anniversary this year, and we're really, excited to have seen the progress we've made over that time period. But really, our focus has always been on making sure that all women have access to financial products and services for both security and prosperity, designing products, working with financial service providers to make sure that they are gender diverse organizations. And over the years, we just continued to find that, as wonderful as our advisory services might be, it's at the end of the day when we walk away from a project, and where Women's World Banking is always very careful to make sure that there is a positive value and profitability of the projects and products that we design. But the it's always in the hands of the individual financial service provider, and in our ability to really drive change inside an organization and on all of those levels that the poll, I think, very clearly, brought out, was limited. And so we decided about a dozen years ago to kind of put our money where our mission was, and we started to invest. We've since, we have raised and deployed 2 funds for a total of $153 million. We will be planning to be in the market with a 3rd fund in the coming year that we're very, very excited about. I think maybe just at the risk of going on a little bit too long, just to say a word about our process, because we tend to look at gender lens investing a bit more broadly than just financing women-owned businesses, even though, as we know, the numbers are really appalling in terms of women's access to finance, and it seems to decline over the years as a percentage of total financing to companies. But we feel that gender lens investing is something that you look at throughout the entire investment process. Your portfolio selection, the way you do your due diligence and what you're looking for in that due diligence. We feel very strongly about taking a board role, and that has been really, I think, sort of one of the sources of our real capacity to drive change. As we raised the 2nd fund, which was significantly larger, we've been able to lead capital rounds, and so we're able to bring a whole, Series B group of investors dedicated to the same gender objectives that we bring along, and then we have found that they're very supportive alongside us at the board. And then, never forget the important role of exiting and making sure that, all of the important gains you may have made in an organization have some lasting ability. So we are, very open to investing in women-led organizations, of course, but we're kind of agnostic on the leadership of the organization. We want it to be diverse, of course, but if their commitment to serving low-income women is there, we've now have a couple of portfolio companies where the management has specifically said, we want Women's World Banking with us because we're having difficulty reaching women clients. And so we're really excited about bringing that kind of value addition equally with the gender lens to our portfolio companies.
Great. You've already started to touch on this a little bit and how you've evolved your approach, but because you've been doing this for a little while, I wanted to ask you to share maybe a couple of important lessons learned or insights from your work as a gender lens investor. Like, why should others be thinking more about this?
Well, I think, one of the nicest things about being an investor is the data that you get. And I think everybody who's working in our field knows how hard it can be to get data, particularly after you might have finished a project and, companies are maybe a little unwilling to continue to say, share information. But I think one of the most exciting things that we have now definitively seen, and it's something we always kind of had a hunch about, but we have very clearly seen a perfect regression analysis, a correlation between having more women in positions throughout the organization, not just at the top, but also not just the boots on the ground, throughout the organization, has a direct impact on serving more women clients. And so that gender diversity impact on being able to have a more diverse client base has been, at least from the 20 companies in our portfolio, has really been sort of definitively proven. I think the other thing that is similarly, the kind of thing we had a hunch about, there have been some studies in the old sort of microfinance days, but we also have really definitively seen that those organizations that we've invested in that have more than 50% women clients have faster growth in portfolio assets, better portfolio quality, better revenue growth. There are really a number of financial metrics that are quite definitively better as a result, I think, as a linkage to that more diverse client base.
Great, thanks. So you found the elusive business case, so to speak. Yeah, because we keep getting asked about it and to keep making it, but it's great to have the data, as you said,
exactly,
to back this up. So Mary Ellen, thank you so much for setting the stage for this conversation. We're now going to kind of move into the panel discussion with our three partners. And, just really grateful to have you as a member of our technical advisory committee.
Thanks so much, Nisha. I'm really eager to hear the panel, and my good friend Rachel, I can see in the corner of the screen over there, eager to hear what everybody has to say. Thanks so much.
Great. All right. So with that, part two of this session will begin with, I'm going to invite Rachel Murphy from Deetken Impact, Rachel Freeman from Tyme Group, and Natasha Dinham from Roots of Impact. I think, yeah, that's my virtual stage. It's complete. Great to have you ladies join me for this interesting conversation after those really interesting insights from Mary Ellen about what they're seeing and having found the elusive business case for investing in women. So maybe to get started on this discussion, I'll start with Rachel Murphy from Deetken. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about who is Deetken Impact, and you have the ELU Women's Empowerment Fund. So what is the fund and what you've been doing?
Sure, thank you, and nice to see everyone. Thank you so much to FinEquity for creating these spaces to exchange and learn. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel today. My name is Rachel Murphy, and I work with Deetken Impact. We are an impact asset manager and currently manage 5 funds that invest throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Over the last decade or so that we've been investing, we've completed over 60 investments in almost all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and about half of our portfolio is focused on financial inclusion. So it's an important sector and an area of impact for us. One of the funds that we manage is the ELU Women's Empowerment Fund. This is a fund in which we kind of developed and piloted our gender lens investing strategy that we now apply across all of our investments. This fund is managed in partnership with ProMujer, who many of you might be familiar with, is a social enterprise that is really leading the charge on financial inclusion in the region. And through this fund, we're really looking to empower women economically, but also through education, through health, through housing, and SME lending. And so about 2/3 of this portfolio is focused on the financial inclusion space. And that's where, again, we've kind of developed this gender lens investing strategy that I can speak more about later on.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the introduction. So we'll go to Natasha from Roots of Impact and to talk about the Impact-Linked Finance Fund for Gender Inclusive FinTechs. Natasha.
Thanks so much, Nisha, and thank you so much for having me. It's really such a pleasure to be here. So my name is Natasha. I'm the co-CEO of Roots of Impact. And we at Roots of Impact, we manage catalytic capital. And over the last 8 years, we've pioneered a practice called impact-linked finance, which is a method of financing that places impact right at the heart of each and every transaction. So we run a number of impact funds through our foundation, the Impact-Linked Finance Fund, and gender is one of our biggest focus areas. Our largest fund is called the Impact-Linked Fund for Gender Inclusive FinTech, and it focuses on deepening gender transformative impact for women within the financial inclusion space.
Great, and we'll talk a little bit more about impact-linked finance and what that means, incentives, when I come back to you. So over to Rachel from Tyme. And if you can introduce yourself and the Tyme group and Tyme specifically.
Hi, it's so great to be here, and it's really nice to see Mary Ellen and Wendy Teleke, Joanna. This is a space, of course, that we at Tyme care a lot about. We're a multi-country digital banking group. We have Tyme Bank in South Africa and Tyme in the Philippines. Both of them are licensed banks. And I'm going to go through some statistics just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about. So Tyme Bank is turning 5 years in February. We are profitable now. That's a big step for us. We have 8.7 million customers in South Africa. In terms of retail customers, 54% are women, 76% of the customers are low income, 33% of our customers are social grant recipients. They only survive on social grants. We have a really interesting lending product for small businesses. We have a lending book of around 110 million. And in that area, 39% of our customers are women-led businesses. 94% of our customers their businesses earn less than $400,000 in revenue a year. So that's also considered that they're pretty much very small businesses. And 68% of our customers on the lending side are in rural areas. So we really believe in South Africa that we are serving kind of really in the financial inclusion space, and we've been able to prove that you can become profitable and by providing responsible finance and really good products to those customers. We launched Tyme Bank in the Philippines in October of 2022. We have 2.4 million customers in the Philippines. We took 10 months to get to our first million customers, and we then hit 2 million customers 4 months later. So we're growing rapidly. Philippines is a little harder in terms of identifying gender. So we have 50% of our customers that are identifying as women. We have then around 20% more that it's unknown. We think those are women as well. So we're actually trending higher in terms of women in the Philippines. 49% of our customers there were either unbanked or severely underbanked before they became a Tyme customer. And 31% of those customers are under the age of 30. We just launched the SME product about in end of November in the Philippines. So we don't have a lot of statistics to talk about because we only have like 80 loans out. But our lending product is a merchant cash advance. It's completely unsecured financing, and we'd actually only look at transactional documentation for the last 3 months of a customer. That's it, no financial statements, nothing. We just looked at transactional data and we make offers. So we don't actually advertise this, and then you actually put out offers specifically to businesses and then bring them in that way. So it's very much of a targeted approach. So super successful. We always love to talk about what we're doing. We know exactly why we're actually getting more women and on the retail side. So I can show that later.
Great, thank you. It's great to hear. Congratulations on the 5 years and all of the outreach and impact. And we'll dig a little bit into what's the secret sauce here. But I'm going to go back to Rachel from Deetken, and Rachel, if you could talk a little bit about what is the approach within the ELO Women's Empowerment Fund. I know recently you published some lessons learned from all of the investments specifically around serving women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Mary Ellen's comments definitely resonated with me at Deetken Impact, and for the ELU Fund, we take a bit of a more expansive view on gender lens investing. And so women-owned and women-led is an important aspect of that. But we have what we call 4 gender lenses that include leadership and governance, also look at product, services, and marketing. We look at value chain equity and advocacy, and also workplace equity. And so those are kind of the 4 lenses with which we can assess a company to understand where it is at in its gender journey. And so for us, that's what gender lens investing is. It's about incorporating gender considerations at every step of our investment process, assessing companies throughout the due diligence process to understand where they're strong and where they may have areas for improvement. A really important aspect of our GLI process is establishing gender objectives in our investment contracts. So once we've conducted this assessment and we've identified those areas for improvement, we sit down with the leadership team to set about 3 to 5 objectives that are really meant to be, smart objectives. They're very specific to the company. They're very actionable. And importantly, we like to make sure that they're aligned with kind of the company's strategic growth plan and the priorities that they have in the near term. And we include those objectives in the investment contract to give them, the importance and put them front and center in terms of our transaction.
Could you?
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, could you give us an example of what you were talking? It's always, I know I find it very helpful to be specific. So it would be great to hear maybe of, what those objectives are specifically, or what kind of activities you do with a particular, financial service provider that you may have worked with.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes the objectives are very clear in terms of, for example, adding a woman to the board of directors or diversifying leadership team. Other times it can be a bit more strategic around designing new products or services specifically for women entrepreneurs. And I think that's one that we've seen a lot of, reception from in the market, a lot of uptick around designing new products. Non-financial services are a really important aspect of our financial inclusion portfolio. And so encouraging companies to consider health services and education services alongside credit products is really important. So again, it may depend on where the company sees that the opportunity is for them in the near term. But again, they're very tailored to kind of the context of that market. And then we obviously, in the monitoring phase, portfolio management, we monitor if they are advancing towards those objectives, and we monitor all of their gender metrics over the course of the investment period. So we have a tool that we call the Gender Scorecard. Is a tool that we developed with our partner PromoHair. We look at, I think, over 150 considerations across their business model. And so we're constantly monitoring that as well. And I think that's been, Mary Ellen mentioned this as well, but, data is certainly power. And we recently did a monitoring of our entire portfolio to see where companies have improved, how they are evolving. The results were very positive in the sense that we've seen companies improve across all of our 4 gender lenses over the investment period. We also saw that of those gender objectives that I mentioned, about 50% of them have already been achieved, and another quarter or so are in progress as we speak. And so I think that, you know, shows that that is an effective way to move the needle. And I have a few more examples that I can talk about, but I think I'll let the other panelists chime in as well.
Great, thanks, Rachel. That's really helpful and good to hear the results. Natasha, turning over to you. So maybe, you know, it would be good to get into a little bit of what are social impact incentives. And, you know, you said you're play a role in terms of catalyzing capital. Specifically, that's your model. How do you do it? What does this mean? You know, where do you fit into that value chain of incentivizing providers to serve women, and how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually work particularly with our Impact Linked Finance Fund for Gender Inclusive FinTech. We partner with impact investors, and Women's World Banking Asset Management was actually one of our initial partners when we launched the fund, and we have been looking for ways to work in Latin America so that we can partner with Deetken, because it's just wonderful to have impact investors who have such a strong focus and such a dedicated focus on gender as partners. So what we do is we provide impact incentives specifically for the companies that we work with to deepen their impact, and particularly in this case, gender impact. So I like to think of impact linked finance, what we do, as a toolbox filled with different financial instruments and tools that all put impact at the heart of the financial transaction. So the social impact incentive, or the SINC as we affectionately call it, was the very first tool in this toolbox that we designed, and it continues to be the one that we use the most today. So it is a very simple blended finance instrument that works alongside a normal investment from an impact investor like Deetken Impact or Women's World Banking. And the SINC, the social impact incentive, is essentially just incentive payments that are paid to an enterprise in exchange for achieving deeper social or environmental impact, and in this case, gender impact. Now, since it accompanies the investment and is not an investment itself, it doesn't need to be repaid. However, the payments are only made after the impact outcomes, the gender outcomes, have been achieved. And the more impact additionality that's achieved through those gender outcomes, the higher the payments are. So I'll give you a tangible example from our Impact Linked Fund for Gender Inclusive FinTech. Here, as I mentioned, we work with Women's World Banking. We also work with Bamboo Capital Partners, Axion, Patamar Capital, and Nordic Impact Funds. And these impact investors make investments into fintechs exactly as they would usually, and we come alongside that investment and provide the fintechs with social impact incentives to deepen their gender transformative impact. Now, since many of our fintechs end customers are MSMEs, we're often incentivizing them to expand their focus on women-led MSMEs and the impact that they're able to have there. And I'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. It's an interesting model, and you know, it helps kind of, as you said, go further, take the capital that's already invested and create opportunities to go further. Rachel, I'll come back to you a little bit about the Tyme. You know, what has been some of the main things that, you know, that helped you see this kind of outreach and impact on women customers? Was that always your intention? How did you start the process? You know, when Tyme is relatively young as a company, as a digital bank in 5 years, what was the thinking at the beginning, and what have you learned along the way? And what, if any, role have your investors played in that?
Well, first, I mean, we're very grateful for our investors because, we started the bank in 2019 and then I mean, we've said this many times publicly, at the bottom of the J curve when COVID hit in South Africa. Our majority shareholder is Patrice Motsepe. He's quite known, Black South African. And because he's the majority shareholder, we're actually also the first Black-owned bank in South Africa. And really, he took care of us during COVID. We all have many now impact investors who have supported us along the way. So, I mean, I think that we started, like, we believe, and our mission is about kind of human empowerment and human potential and how financial services can enable that. So we started from that standpoint. And we also believe that two things. One is no one wakes up in the morning and says, today I want to get a bank account. So you have to manufacture the interaction. And the second piece is that we believe you can only walk from where you stand. So you can't ask somebody to be more digitally savvy than they are. You have to walk the journey. So we, in terms on the retail side, have digital kiosks that we place into national retail. So you can walk into the grocery store in South Africa or in the Philippines, open a bank account in South Africa in 3 minutes, in the Philippines in 5 minutes, and you get at the end of that period a printed debit card, Visa, with your name on it. So it's fully active, and then you can take that to the cash register at the store and put money in immediately and start using the account. So we then have ambassadors in the stores that show you how to use the account, help you download the app, and kind of show all the different use cases and talk to you about the account. So we do immediate kind of financial education in the stores to get activity going. And so we know that our ambassadors, it's the mixture of the kiosk plus the ambassadors in a location which people go and they're already thinking about money because they're in a store, that brings us together. 80% of our customers still in South Africa come through the kiosk, 70% in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, our partner there, our lead investor in terms of the joint venture, is the Go Conway Group. They own 4,000 retail stores, 52 malls, et cetera. So they're the perfect partner for us. So that aspect actually really starts off the whole process. And we think that having the ambassadors plus the kiosk actually in a very user-friendly way has enabled us to have so many customers get to scale, but also has driven women customers. Though the gender of the ambassador has no impact actually on the customer in that. In terms of the MSME product that we have, which is Merchant Cash Advanced, we actually white label this through payment processors. So we in South Africa work with Yoko, Ioka, many others. And so the customer does not know that this is Tyme Bank in the back. They think of this as, like, for example, Yoko Pay. So we take the transactional data from the actual point of sale in the store or in the doctor's office, anywhere that there's a point of sale. We analyze that data and we lend based on, we make an offer that says over this amount of time, we'll give you this amount of money and you need to pay us back this. So there's no need to calculate interest rates, which makes it easier for the customers. And we take a tiny percentage repayment every single day on the actual point of sale. So that's the collection process. But what it means is that our repayment is directly linked to sales. So if there's a big day, then we get more money. And if there's a less good day, we get less money. And so we actually have designed the product to really fit with the revenue cycle of the businesses. And this way, which is, not dependent at all on collateral, it is actually not dependent on any kind of gender bias because it's just based on anonymous transaction data that we get, enables to take a lot of those issues away. And that's how we've been able to drive the gender numbers up in South Africa for that product. Though this product was actually, we acquired this product. It's not homegrown for us. We acquired the company that did this a year ago. And because of our focus in terms on the retail side, we've actually been able to significantly increase the number of women customers over the past year, just with the link with Tyme Bank and the fact that we're so well known. On the social grant aspect. So our social grant program, we have kiosks and ambassadors in social grant offices. So we're actually doing that education for the customers there. But the other thing that we've done, which is quite an innovative product for them, is that so in South Africa, unfortunately, social grants are paid not regularly. So it's not like it's such a, on this day you're getting this. However, we designed a product very similar to earned wage access, which is a product in the US and now many other countries, where we think of social grants like a salary. And so when we know that the social grant is going to be paid, even if it's 2 weeks before the government pays it, then we will launch and we will pay out the grants, and then we get repaid by the government. So if you want, you can sign up for this program and get your salary advance earlier. And that enables those customers to really smooth out their income source and actually begin to manage their finances much better. And again, they have the ambassador that can help them do that. And that product alone has driven this huge increase for us on the social grant side. And for us, those customers are, say, the motion cash advance was very important, but in terms of the direct reason we'd be able to become profitable this year is because of this really innovative program with the social grant office recipients. So they were the ones that kind of took us over the top with profitability, which we think is a really great state.
It's great to hear. And what I take away from this is, Rachel, you're really understanding who your customer is, where they go, what they do, and really accounting for that in designing products around their life, as opposed to we have a product and you can use it. So
yeah, so someone just asked third country. So country 3 is Vietnam. We're going to be launching the SME product for test and learn in 2 months. So we're hot onto Vietnam right now. Vietnam has almost the highest female participation in employment globally. So we know that our model is going to be very successful because of that specific aspect.
great, thanks for sharing that. I know, I wanted to go around and ask a little bit about while all of this sounds great, we know that it's great to have these results, but there's always challenges in this journey. So Rachel, from Deetken's perspective, what were some of the hurdles that you've seen in finding the right partner? Often gender falls off as a priority for institutions if there are other urgent business priorities that show up. And with the ILU Fund, you were operating partially when the world went through COVID. So any kind of lessons learned in dealing with challenges and hurdles?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think Rachel and the Tyme story is very inspiring, because I think that's a good, North Star as to how do we get to, designing services that are truly designed for women and their needs. And I think that is where we've identified the need to provide more than just capital to our clients. So when we kind of fully implemented our gender lens investing strategy starting in around 2019, and after assessing and working with dozens of companies, we found that, we were convincing companies of the importance of integrating gender considerations into their business. And we'd established these gender objectives, and there was a lot of commitment and enthusiasm from these companies to moving these forward. But as you said, the pandemic hit, other priorities get in the way, or often teams just didn't have, the time or the experience, right, to achieve these on their own. And so we were fortunate enough to receive funding from USAID to run a technical assistance program in which we worked in a really in-depth capacity with 15 of our portfolio companies in tailored engagement projects to design gender smart business strategies. And this was everything from, again, designing new products or services. We did a number of projects on gender smart information systems and how to collect and use gender disaggregated data in decision-making. We did a number that were focused on, inclusive recruitment and talent management strategies, community engagement. We kind of covered the whole spectrum. And I think that was a really pivotal moment for the ILU Fund, because it enabled us from going from a place of, just incentivizing or emphasizing the importance of all of this to actually working alongside the teams over the course of several months to actually advance these strategies. And so I think that that's what it takes. And, we always remind our clients that, being gender smart is not about just branding a project or a product as a women's product, or, we always say the pink credit card that is not what we're looking for. We're trying to go out and understand our clients and thoughtfully design products and services, just as kind of Rachel was mentioning. And so I think that's where the importance of this type of advisory comes in. And so today we've really brought that forward in all of our work. We really work alongside our teams, connecting them with resources, with subject matter experts, visiting them in person to really provide that support when possible.
Great, thanks. Natasha, I wanted to turn to you and ask you if you could share maybe some examples of the types of outcomes that you incentivize, and also if you've faced any kind of resistance, because I know you've done this in other sectors also. So was there any learning you're bringing from there into your work with fintechs?
Absolutely. So I'll start off with some of the lessons that we've brought across from other funds, and this speaks to Hannah's point in the chat that what we're doing is we're tying money to impact outcomes, and that means that you have to make 100% sure that these outcomes have actually been achieved, and that means data. And so this has been one of the biggest challenges that we faced, is particularly working, when you're working with early stage small businesses, getting that data to make sure that those outcomes have been achieved. So what we do to address this is we do some of this work in-house with the fintechs that we work with, but we also work with amazing partners like 60 Decibels and Value for Women and other TA providers to help our fintechs develop gender action plans if they don't already have them, and then measure their impact at the end customer level. And the actual outcomes that we incentivize, they are bespoke. So we design them with each fintech depending on the context, but they usually fall into one of three buckets. So either livelihood improvements like income increases, cost savings, or improved financial health for end customers. The second one is a focus on inclusivity, for example, first-time access or reaching underserved women. And the third one is focused around internal transformation. So what Mary Ellen was saying in the beginning, we know that the more gender transformation there is internally within an organization, the more this is going to affect the end customers as well. And so we incentivize internal gender transformation and look at the effect that's having on those women's livelihoods and lives as well.
Great, thanks. So data seems to be the thread, everything. We need data to be able to show impact, but we also need data to be able to understand who our customers are and how they're using the products, benefiting from them. So yeah, that seems to be a common thread. Rachel, just turning to you in terms of Tyme, obviously you've seen great success, but I'm sure this has not been easy. It's been probably somewhat of a bumpy journey. So what are some of the, challenges that you faced along the way, either internal or external, in some ways staying true to what you wanted to do and getting to some of those impacts in terms of reaching women as customers, serving them?
Yeah, I mean, so like what we say is, I mean, we've made so many mistakes, but now when we talk to different partners, we say that because we're on bank 3, we're not going to make the same mistakes we did when we made bank 1. So we've already solved those. So people are doing it the first time, they're gonna have those mistakes. So we're like, we don't promise we won't make many, many mistakes, but we're going to make different ones. So like one example is that when you have the ambassadors, and how do you incentivize the ambassadors so that they're kind of, because that they're going to figure out how to game the system in terms of any incentive program. So it took us 9 months to figure out with Time Bank how the different ways you can game the system from the ambassadors. It took us 3 weeks with Go Time because we had already done it the first time. So that's kind of the different types of lessons that we learned. Another lesson, this may not be very positive to people to hear, but is that we don't actually think that startups and other startups do well working together. So if we're the startup, we tend to work on the technology side with very well-established service providers. We're hosted with AWS. We won't go into a country that does not have AWS. And the other, like on the data side, Pega, these are well-established companies. So then you're putting at risk if two people, are both kind of on the startup side. So that's one thing that our CTO feels fairly strongly about. But yeah, I mean, we've had lots of ups and downs, where over the last year, we've just really focused to be to profitable, because it does change everything. Like for us, it was like life was black and white and became color, like the Wizard of Oz, with this kind of moving into black from red, enables us to do and think about other things. So that has been the complete focus. And we have been, we have canceled different programs that we thought we would do on the capacity building side to get this, because once we knew we were there, we would be able to go back to those. So it's about a little bit in the digital banking world or fintech world about making sure you have the right unit economics, tracking the data. So the data that a lot of what I gave you, our head of data developed an algorithm for me, so that whenever I need these numbers on gender or youth or any of these different numbers, that he will run this and I can write him, and then 30 seconds later, he'll have all the numbers for me from South Africa. And now the Philippines will be online in like 3 weeks. So it's that type of data to know exactly what's happening to the moment that I think is really important to actually make it and kind of make it through all the ups and downs to a successful business.
Great. Since we've been talking so much about data, I just wanted to turn towards this question of, we've used the word impact so many times already, but this question is more for Rachel and Natasha first. If you wanted to share anything about, are the current ways of measuring impact, sufficient, or how are you doing this? And what is it that you measure? Is it number of women, or are there additional outcomes that you're looking at? And what are those? Natasha, maybe you can go first. Sorry.
Sure. Very happy to go first. So when it comes to measuring, one of the things we really focus on doing as much as possible is to ask ourselves often the so what question. So we reached another woman-led SME. So what? Like, did this improve her life? And we try as much as possible to avoid making assumptions about impact. So wherever we can, and with the caveat that this is not always possible, but wherever we can, we try to select metrics that look not only at the number of women reached, but also the depth of impact. Like, for example, increases in income or increases in saving as a result of reaching those women. Like I said, it's not always possible. We don't always get it perfectly right, but where we can, we really try our best to avoid making assumptions about the impact that's being created.
Great. Rachel?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we try to encourage our clients to go beyond just counting women and men and really understanding, changes in their quality of life and their business performance. And so we've really seen with our clients the need to improve information systems, right? And that doesn't always have to mean overhauling the core banking system or implementing a new software. Often it can just mean kind of leveraging, existing touch points that they have with their clients to kind of expand the data that they are collecting. And like Natasha said, going beyond just understanding how many people we are reaching to kind of collecting data about their socioeconomic situation and then monitoring that. And so that might happen in the credit application process, in repayments, in credit renewal. Those are all opportunities to expand data collection. But what we've also seen is that just having and collecting the data is certainly not enough. Often that data is very difficult to access. It's not easily, well systematized, or, what Rachel said, having that data on hand within, 30 seconds, that's, where we need to get to, but that requires also having a robust system in place, to facilitate that decision making. So that's something that we've worked with our clients to build out, is the entire kind of data management life cycle.
Great. Rachel, I wanted to ask you from, Tyme is a data-driven effort. You have a lot of data. So in terms of what do you look for when you're looking at impact, beyond serving these women enterprises or women as customers? And do you get any questions from investors about it? And what kind of reporting do you do to them?
Yeah, so we have, many impact investors. And so, we have a formal ESG policy and indicators that we report on a quarterly. Now we've organized it to a quarterly basis. So in terms of our development, one of the things that we just did is kind of said, now, no, we don't want so many ad hoc requests, but just this is what we're going to report on, and we're going to do it quarterly, which enables the investors to know what's coming and when, but also allows us to kind of free up people's times. So that's kind of in terms of indicators, and we have all these indicators both on employees, on board, on management, on customers that we have, and we compare apples to apples. So across so the definitions are quite important between the two institutions. But we also have, and I know there's team members from CGAP here. So we do a research project every year with CGAP, and do a deep dive. So first was on the model, then we did a deep dive on exactly who our customers are. So then we can track once they set up the methodology, and then we actually take their methodology and we continue to track the things that they do. So this year, then we did last year was on our social grant recipients. And this year we're doing on the SME product. So we're going to have lots of actual that's where often, like customers, we have over 200 customers will be interviewed on a number of different indicators. So we do that type of qualitative research, but that's always done, like not led by us, but in partnerships with CGAP. We've also done, work with Financial Alliance for Women on these things, so that we don't have that expertise, but we do have our partnerships with, and we love CGAP, we love Financial Alliance for Women, we love Women's World Banking, and we try to work with all of these different groups so that they kind of can learn from us and we can learn from them and help us to analyze the data, because the expertise lies there. And we are quite lean, so we have across the two markets, 11 million customers on the retail side, and then we have the SME product, and we still are only about 800 total staff in the business, including all of the engineers and the coders and everything like that. So we try to be very, very lean, and then work in partnership with different groups. So if anybody would like to work with us on some of this, we'd be very happy. We like to share our story, and we like people to come and kind of tell us how we can be doing things better. We love to kind of engage on the thought leadership in this. Because we're not changing the model. We're going to countries, but we're sticking with our approach, our customer base, how we've done this. We think that we have cracked something, and so we want to take the model to more countries rather than change the model and going into, in those countries that we already are.
Great. So I see that the panelists have been very actively even responding to questions in the chat, which is amazing. But I did want to kind of pick a couple of those questions, and I don't know if everybody was following it, and see if we can, bring them to this stage. So I thought the question that Lisa asked Natasha about failed experiments was really interesting, initiatives that were intended to have a positive gender impact but didn't. And how do you factor that into your process, Natasha? I know you wrote a response, but it would be great to have you speak to that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question, Lisa. Thank you so much. So this is why focusing on the outcome level as much as possible is really useful for us, because we have had instances in the past where we assumed that, if we just increase the number of women, good things would happen, and then we realized that good things were not happening. And so we really do try and as much as possible get as detailed into the data as possible in terms of understanding the effect that this is having on women's lives and their livelihoods. We find, partners like 60 Decibels are really useful for this, for gathering that sort of data. But we also build in the ability to adjust metrics over time as we learn to allow for failure. And then we keep in touch with our fintechs. We check in with them quarterly. We see how their business model is playing out, how their expectations were playing out, and we allow ourselves that flexibility to be able to say, in year 0, we set up 3 years of metrics. Maybe when we get to year 2, it just doesn't make sense the way we've laid it out. How do we adjust that to make sure that it does make sense based on what we've learned over those 2 years? And then when we designed the fund, we put a big proportion of the fund dedicated specifically to learning, so that we've got the dedicated capacity and resources, not only internally, but with a partner, to be able to learn from what we're doing, and also then feed those lessons back into the rest of the market as we go. So we're still relatively young in this fund, but as we go, we will be feeding more and more of those lessons of what we learn back into the market and sharing, so that other people can learn from our mistakes.
Great. So FinEquity would be a great place to continue to share some of those lessons learned. As you can see, there's a lot of interest in this audience around that. I know, Alison, you directed your question to Natasha, but I also wanted to see if Rachel had something to share on, successful strategies you've seen for FSPs to boost the number of women within the organization, as employees, as leaders, if there's something that you've seen in the Deetken portfolio, especially in legacy institutions that might be very heavily male dominated.
Yeah, I think maybe I can share a concrete example to kind of bring this to light. So one microfinance institution that we invested in southern Mexico, when we first assessed this company, there was very little representation of women on the leadership team, no women on the board of directors. And so that was something that really called our attention in the assessment period. And so we set gender objectives specifically to advance diversity in leadership and management. As I mentioned, we were then able to provide tailored technical assistance. And so we came in and did a project really that was focused on fostering the employment and recruitment, but also promotion of women employees within the organization. And so we first kind of assessed their human resources processes and provided really concrete recommendations, altered a few things in their recruitment and talent management process. We implemented a women's mentorship program. We got about 30, high potential women employees in the room, and we facilitated kind of this professional development space. And then we did a series of workshops also for the leadership team to really build awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why this is important. And in the 2 years since we finished that program, that company has since added 2 women to their board of directors and has doubled the representation of women in leadership. And I think that, this is an example that shows us how important it is, I think, to get the leadership team on board. One of they hired a woman to join their leadership team that specifically kind of became the impact director. And so I think giving space for that within the C-suite really made sure that they were moving things forward. it became a part of the core conversation. And so I think integrating that into to the leadership team is really important.
Great, thanks for that excellent example, Rachel. I don't know, Natasha, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I really didn't. I'm so glad that Rachel had a concrete example, because when I saw that question, I thought unfortunately, we're just not far enough to really have good answers to that. So thanks, Rachel.
Great. So I wanted to take one more audience question and see who wanted to go first. But it was around, this idea of public alliances. All of you have mentioned different partners you've worked with, people on this call and in general. What do you see as maybe some broader ecosystem or policy issues in the contexts you work in? And is there a role for some kind of public alliances to kind of address some of those challenges? So I'm not going to call out whoever feels like going first, unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Oh, Rachel, please go ahead.
No, you go ahead first.
All right. So what we see, because very often impact linked finance, there's a number of different ways of structuring it, but it very often works very nicely as a blended finance model where we work alongside investors, and so there's the investment capital, but then for the catalytic side, we really do need public development funding or foundational funding, but usually development funding is an ideal match in order to bring this incentive impact-linked model to life. It also has a lot of benefits for development agencies, because it is the payouts are only made after the impact has been achieved and the outcomes have been created. So we see it as, I'm hesitant to use the term win-win because I feel like it's become a bit of a tainted term, but we see it as the opportunity to create a lot of impact for development agencies, but be able to do that in a way that not only ensures that the impact is created, but also provides sustainability for development agencies by working with the private sector and ensuring that that impact is maintained over the long term. So that's where I see really huge potential from a blended finance perspective of bringing forward public sector funding towards agenda outcomes.
Great, thanks, Natasha. Rachel, Freeman?
Yeah, so both the banks we have are regulated, and so there's very important is to have that kind of dialogue with the regulators in terms of kind of everything from AI or how you do eKYC, why that's important. Cloud, Tyme would not exist if not for cloud being and that was a conversation with the regulator in South Africa. We actually wrote the cloud policy for the central bank in Pakistan. So it's very important to have kind of a alliance, and it's not just us, but actually all the digital banks together have formed in the Philippines an alliance, and then engage with the regulator through that way, as well as kind of in the supervisory relationship that we have. So having a very active kind of dialogue between kind of the innovators and the regulators, I think is very important to move the whole industry forward.
Great, thanks. And we will in the next part of this session, we'll have a conversation around policy. So hopefully, some of this conversation can continue. Rachel, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just quickly, I would say, of course, our partnership with ProMujer has been very catalytic in terms of bringing their firsthand expertise on working with women entrepreneurs. But also, I talked a lot about providing more than just capital, and obviously that is something that, we rely on partnerships for that as well. Unfortunately, management fees don't always cover those types of services. And so I think funders and actors such as USAID and others, investors that are aligned to these objectives, I think can really make the difference for a fund manager as well.
Great. Some very concrete ideas, role of blended finance, bringing together, all of the local stakeholders, bringing in engaging the policymakers. all very important. And I did want to flag over here an initiative called the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Code, or the WeFi Code, that many of you might have heard, which is, an initiative spearheaded by WeFi that brings together, financial service providers, public sector, and ecosystem actors to work together to systematically support the advancement of women-led micro, small, medium enterprises. And it's really focused on, leveraging champions, creating better data ecosystems and public commitments to create incentives for action. So we will do a separate FinEquity session with the WeFi team on the code later in the spring, but just wanted to flag that. And I believe somebody from the WeFi team will share a bit more information on this in the chat. In the last few minutes of this session, I see again in the chat there people have been sharing a lot of good resources and examples of their work and what they're learning, because, within FinEquity, there's a lot of good lessons learned from our members also. In my role on leading this theme, we are going to be putting together a curated set of resources, tools that can be useful for both investors and providers who are looking to leverage gender lens investing or impact capital, and specifically to focus on supporting women-led enterprises. And a lot of I think the tools will be around, okay, how do you operationalize an investment thesis, or how do you start to look at outcomes, and what are we learning in that process? So please share as many of your resources now. We'll also put this out on FinEquity channels to ask for your resources and learnings. And as a sort of wrap up to this discussion, before we turn into the next part of this discussion, I think I wanted to ask each of you on the panel maybe to share, one or two things that you think, from everything you've said, you've already shared such great insights, that you would like the FinEquity community to keep in mind or think about as it relates to focusing on, and supporting women entrepreneurs in the different contexts that this very large community works in. So just for the sake of order, who wants to go first? Should I call you, or do you need a minute too? This is a surprise question for my panel. Natasha, are you?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go first. I would just encourage the community to ask the question that we ask ourselves all the time, because, and the reason I suggest it is because it very often leads to such interesting conversations and dialogues, and that is the question of so what, So we're reaching women, but what does that mean for them, and how do we know, and how do we get that data? And there's so much interesting stuff that comes out of that, and so that for me has been a real game changer.
Rachel Murphy?
Yeah, sure. I think if there's anything we've learned over the last couple of years, it's that, this is a never-ending journey. But I think in order to make sure that we're always moving forward, setting objectives, I think it's a very simple task, but something that really helps to keep teams accountable, and really highlight, what do we want to achieve? And those can be very ambitious, or they can also be very kind of short-term and low-hanging fruit. We found, in addition to kind of setting those objectives and having a roadmap, having people responsible within the team, making this an area of work, whether that's, integrating that into an existing area of work, or we found setting up what we call a gender committee can be very powerful as well, but making sure that there is accountability within the team to follow up on these, and a place for learning as well, because as I mentioned, this is something that we're all constantly learning about and moving forward.
Great, thanks. And Rachel?
Well, I think the first thing is that for those kind of startups that are on this, and people work with startups, that all startups have many existential crises. And so if you're in a startup, then you're having those, you should know that just keep going, that there's a solution for these, and that every institution, no matter how great they look, goes through existential crises. So when I joined Tyme in fall of 2019, and we were doing a capital raise at that point, and I think we talked to 150 institutions, and we got turned down by every single one of them. All right, so then we just kept going, and look, now we look like, oh, we're so brilliant, but there have been some quite low moments. So you just have to kind of have faith. And then the other thing is that, like, we try not to overcomplicate things. Like when I said, this idea of like, no one gets up in the morning and says, today I want to get a bank account. Like we talk about that every day, that kind of concept, or you can only walk from where you stand. It sounds really obvious, but those kind of things and thinking about kind of making it down to very simple little sayings like that, I think is really important. And then, of course, I mean, for us, we get the beauty of having our wonderful name, Tyme. So you can imagine all the puns that we get to have play around with, which is also very fun.
Great, some really inspiring words from the entire panel. I would like to really thank you for your time and sharing these insights in your journey, sharing both the successes, but also some of the challenges. As we know that, despite what Mary Ellen said at the beginning of the discussion, how in the women's oil banking portfolio, they're seeing this business case. There's a direct correlation. We already have so much data around why investing in women is good, both socially and financially, but we keep needing to make this business case. I'm hoping that some of the discussion today helps us kind of move forward more into, yes, this is a good idea. Now let's talk about how can we do it, and practically into some of those strategies. So thank you so much, panel. And I'm going to now hand it over to Aude to continue the conversation from a policy and practice perspective. So over to you, Aude.
Thanks so much, Nisha and panelists, for a really, really rich discussion. As we wrap up the discussion, we really wanted to invite two of our technical advisory committee members to chime in and share some of their experiences. So it's my pleasure to introduce Audrey Hove, who's the Senior Policy Manager for Gender and Inclusive Finance at AFI. And before joining AFI, Audrey was the Deputy Director of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Nice to have you with us, Audrey. Our other technical advisory committee member is Shamron Abed. He's the Executive Director of BRAC International. He also chairs numerous boards, but one of which is Bcash, one of the largest mobile money providers. He's currently in Freetown, Liberia, visiting one of the BRAC operations, and had a difficult connection earlier, so I hope he makes it to this chat. Audrey, Shamron, lovely to have you here. Audrey, can I start with a question to you? Audrey, yes, we heard during the discussion a lot about how gender lens investment can really help grow women-led MSMEs. But I wanted to ask you, from a policy perspective, what are some of the key constraints that are faced by women-led MSMEs? And I know that you have done a lot of work, and AFI has done a survey recently on this. Can you highlight some of your findings from the AFI survey?
Yes, thank you very much for the question relating to the projects that we have undertaken on women SMEs, financial inclusion, which we did with the support of the African Development Bank. So basically, the purpose of the exercise was to understand the policy and regulatory environment of women SMEs in Africa. So it's a project that we did on phase 1, where we undertook 7 case studies, and now we are looking at 13 more case studies. So basically, the purpose or the issues that came out from the case study relating to what are the challenges as well as the opportunities that we see in terms of what regulators can actually do in supporting women's financial inclusion, with a particular focus on women SMEs. So in terms of the barriers that we observed, I'm sure you all appreciate and agree with me that generally women, they are involved in unpaid work. And for those that are paid, sometimes the income is very low, which then affects their level of activity in terms of developing their businesses. Then we also noted the issue of social and cultural norms, which is a challenge, and in many jurisdictions, they are considered to be minors, or issues around even access to collateral. It's really a challenge for them to be able to access financial services. From a supply side perspective, we also noted that the financial services themselves, they are not generally adapted to the needs of the women, and there are also issues around legal barriers, lack of formal identification. Mobility issues was also a challenge. Credit infrastructure is generally not available in some jurisdictions. Markets is another challenge that we also noted. So in terms of what regulators are actually doing, we have established that regulators are making a deliberate effort in supporting women SMEs. Of the 7 case studies that we did, we observed that 6, they've made, they've got financial inclusion strategies, and they have got women SMEs as specific targets in their financial inclusion strategies, which is very critical for purposes of monitoring themselves, and also being deliberate in engaging other stakeholders to ensure that these issues are addressed. And we have also noticed that they've come up with others, they may not have a financial inclusion strategy, but they have got a framework which then supports women SMEs. So this issue of regulators being deliberate in supporting women SMEs, we think it will go a long way and in building the SME sector, and as well as addressing some of the challenges that regulators, that the sector is facing. So we are now looking into the second phase, where we are going to undertake 13 more case studies to bring it to 20. So these are available on the website. The 7 are available on the website, and the 20 we are working on them. And I'm sure in a year's time, you'll be able to see them. And we're also coming up with a comprehensive document that looks at the lessons learned in the sector. So thank you very much, Aude. Back to you.
Yeah, you're not off the hook, Audrey, especially since it seems that Shamron is having difficulty joining. But you know, when we talked about this earlier, we talked about a recent working paper that CGAP has put out that talks about the need for more supply-side gender disaggregated data. I also heard Mary-Ellen earlier say that one of the very nice things as an investor is you get all the data you want. I want to ask you, is there a way to align the data that's required by investors on the one hand, by supervisors on the others, by providers maybe, so that it's used to serve women better in a more responsible way?
Thank you. Thank you, Aude. Yes, the issue of sex disaggregated data is becoming very prominent, particularly within the network, within the AFI network. And I'm sure for those who may not have enough information about the AFI network, we are a network of regulators, policymakers, and the financial, with a focus on financial inclusion. So basically, we have seen a lot of interest and appetite within our members for sex disaggregated data. That is both from a demand side and a supply side perspective. But going back to your question on supply side data, we have noted that it's also a challenge in the network because it really takes a lot of effort for one to be able to collect this kind of data. If you look at it from a perspective of the financial service providers, the expectation is the supply side data is also coming from the financial service providers, who in some cases do not have the capacity to actually invest in technology for them to be able to supply that kind of data. So it's now incumbent upon the regulators to create an enabling environment, maybe in the form of a SupTech, which enables compliance within the sector where the financial service providers are now able to supply that data to the regulators. And there's also the issue of the availability of the data from the other stakeholders, which is also critical in making informed policies. So while yes, maybe the financial service providers may now be supplying the data to the regulators, but there is need for other data which may be outside of the remit of the financial service providers and the regulators, which requires a lot of collaboration, engagement with the other stakeholders to first of all agree on the nature of data that should be supplied, as well as to have the capacity to analyze the data, make it more meaningful, and be able to inform the policies as they are developed. So you find we recommend even issues of coming up with committees. We have seen it happen in other jurisdictions where data committees are actually constituted with maybe the National Statistics Office leading or the regulator leading, but we need to have someone who can actually bring the stakeholders together to ensure that supply side data is available and it's analyzed in a manner that it is useful and it can assist in making informed decisions. That's how I would respond to your question, Aude.
Thanks so much, Audrey. I think we managed to get Shamron on the call. So Shamron, welcome. I know that you're in Freetown and it's not easy right now. I just I know you weren't able to join all the conversation, but we talked a lot about different efforts, including the Wi-Fi code, but others, to really improve sex disaggregated data, in particular on enterprise financing. Can I ask you, Shamron, from the role you play at BRAC, how does BRAC serve women-led MSMEs? And what role does data play in serving these women-led businesses?
Hi, thanks so much, Aude. So sorry, just to clarify, Shamron is going to join in just a minute. He's just come out of the meeting with the president, as you know, so he'll be on in a second. So if you don't mind bearing with us, everybody, apologies for that.
No problem, no problem. Thanks, thanks for making it. So, Audrey, as we wait, a last question to you, which is an important one, a foundational one. How do you at AFI define women-led MSMEs? Because the definition from the policy perspective is also very important for us to hear.
Okay. So in AFI, we do not have a standard definition of women SMEs because I'm sure you know we are a member-led organization, and each member is free to define SMEs in the way that they see possible and what works in their jurisdictions. But suffice to say, we look at the number of women. So if an SME is owned by a woman or is led by a woman, where maybe the CEO, the MD, there's a director who is participating in that entity, we also define, we also use that as a definition of women-led SME. But in terms of the broad definition of an SME, each member would define maybe in terms of number of employees, or maybe in terms of the contribution to GDP, or their turnover, their annual turnover. So it varies across jurisdictions. But now when we move it to being a woman-led or a woman-owned SME, we are now looking at who is sitting at the top, who is directing the operations of that SME, which becomes important. But suffice to say, also our members are also very keen in coming up with definitions for women SMEs, which is quite interesting from where we sit.
Thanks so much, Audrey.